Thank you for this opportunity. And I think this discussion on equity is very topical because we all know that COVID-19 is exacerbating inequities. We always had inequities in immunization, but I think this pandemic is only further compounding the vulnerabilities that already exist. Next slide, please. So I would really want to draw a distinction between equity that exists among countries and the challenge of equity within countries. So when Gavi was set up in 2000, that is the time when the world was even more unequal than it is today. And you can see here that as a result of the scale up of new vaccines, there has been a whooping decline in vaccine preventable diseases related child mortality in Gavi supported countries, 70%. And that really speaks to the narrowing of the gap that existed between the rich countries and poor countries in 2000 in terms of access to new life-saving vaccines. Next, please. You can see here some very interesting trends that now, with the support that has been provided by the Alliance, not only the vaccine gap between low and high income countries has been closed, but Gavi supported countries actually have a much higher coverage of some of the vaccines. So HIP vaccine now has 81% coverage in Gavi supported countries compared to 58% in non-Gavi. And similarly on pneumococcal and rotavirus, we have increasing coverage trends in Gavi countries. In fact, it is peculiar that we see inequity now in upper middle income countries that are not supported by Gavi and have been struggling to introduce some of these new vaccines. Next slide. So here you can see that it is not just that with the Alliance support, countries are now reaching more and more children, but also children are receiving more vaccines. So the breadth of protection has had an incredible increase during the last 20 years. You can see here that when we started out on HIB, PCV rota, the second dose of measles, and IPV yellow fever, we really virtually started from zero ground. And now you see an impressive increase in coverage across Gavi countries. That said, we have to remind ourselves that it is only 11% children in Gavi supported countries who receive the full protection of all the 11 vaccines that have been recommended by WHO. So while impressive progress has happened, there is still a lot of road to cover. Next. Next, please. So here you see the progress during the last 2 decades. First, population growth and the increase in birth cohort. So really when we started out in 2000, we had a birth cohort, an annual birth cohort of 70 million, and now we have an annual birth cohort of 80 million. And you can also see that despite the increase in the size of the birth cohort, immunization rates really moved up from 41 million in 2000 to about 65 million in 2019. And at the same time, the number of under-immunized children has nearly been halved. But you can see here that the number of zero-dose children has come down, but we are seeing plateauing during the last about 3-4 years. And the concept of zero dose is a new concept and it's something that we have now started to talk about in our new strategy with WHO and all our alliance partners. And zero dose is actually that child who hasn't received even a single dose of DTP. All these years, the focus really has been on those children who have not received the 3rd dose of DTP, because that is what we have used as a proxy indicator of access to immunization. But as we started to dig deeper, we realized that it is really those children who haven't had even a single shot of DTP, who are living in those communities that are completely missed not just by immunization, but by really pretty much all basic essential services. They suffer from compounded vulnerabilities and multiple deprivations, and therefore it is important for us to start zooming in on these communities which are home to zero-dose children. Next slide, please. So zero-dose child, we are actually emphasizing is a marker of acute inequity and poverty. And we can really say that zero-dose child is a North Star that takes us into those communities and habitations which require multi-agency, multi-sectoral action. Because a lot of times, these are communities where you would typically find SAM children. These are communities where girls are not in school, where agency of women is very low. There is huge violence against women. There's lack of contraception, lack of RMNCA services, etc., etc. And as we did some further analyses, we found that 2 out of these 3 zero-dose children live in households which survive on less than $2 a day. That really means that a large majority of these children live in extreme poverty. So really an inextricable link between inequity and poverty, which is unmistakable. Next slide. We've also seen that these mixed communities are often epicenters of outbreaks, and therefore, till now, our approach has been to actually maintain stockpiles and provide support for outbreak response, the supplementary immunization activities that Anne alluded to. But increasingly now, there is a recognition that we have to get ahead and really not just react and respond to outbreaks, but start to shine light on these mixed communities and zero-dose children and make sure they receive on-time vaccination so that you prevent accumulation of unvaccinated children, which then gives rise to outbreaks subsequently. Oh, next. So this is our really new thinking around zero-dose children, where we are starting to talk about a new framework. As we started to study the whole issue of zero-dose, we realized that even identifying those zero-dose children is a huge challenge. So when we were doing campaigns for measles, we started to highlight the imperative of actually starting from those communities where children are unvaccinated. And we realized that that is not possible for countries because enough investment has not been made to actually identify where these mixed communities are and where these zero-dose children live. So really the first step here for us is to start to identify who these children are, where they live, why they are zero-dose, what are the barriers that they suffer from, and how many of those live in those communities. Because we are pushing our thinking to create gravitation towards the zero-dose and mixed communities through dedicated financing, something that really we want to put on the table now. And then the second step for us is to reach these communities. Till now, there has been a lot of emphasis on global approaches, one-size-fits-all approach, but at the Alliance now, we have moved very rapidly in the direction of flexible approaches, where we recognize the need to increasingly resort to tailored strategies which address both supply and demand side barriers. But there is a very strong acknowledgement that these can't be global or regional strategies, but these have to be ultra local and community-based, community-driven, and community-owned. The third step in this framework that we consider extremely important is really to monitor and measure, because monitoring has been a challenge, as all of you are aware, and measuring outcomes is even more difficult. Right now, in immunization, we have unique estimates that are published on a yearly basis. They have a certain methodology, which relies on surveys, which happen only after long intervals. And while unique estimates give us a sense of direction of travel, they definitely unfortunately are unable to give us any real-time understanding of progress or lack of it. So really, thinking about new strategies where we establish learning hubs to understand how some of these investments and approaches are yielding results is a very important element of this framework. And really the last is advocacy, because we feel that these zero-dose children are not a part of political consciousness. Most of the times they are invisible, they are mute, they don't have that political influence or weight, and therefore they are neglected. So really using data in order to constantly advocate for greater investments in zero-dose children is a very vital aspect of this new strategy. And linked with this, as I said, is our whole endeavor to really create financial incentives which help us trigger that conversation at the country level and make sure we prioritize zero-dose children in all our conversations and plans. Next slide. So some of the things that we have already started to do, one is that during the last 4 years, we have actually moved away from national averages, recognizing that some of this macro data can actually mask grave and deep inequities. So really disaggregating data and breaking it down to bring a subnational focus has been a very important part of our strategy. And here I am sharing with you 2 examples. For example, Pakistan, where we triangulated a lot of data sources and to try and understand where exactly these zero-dose children live. And here you can see, there are several different provinces and districts actually. So it's not just provinces. We are moving from provinces to districts and from districts to actually blocks to understand where are these clusters of zero-dose children that require special attention. Similarly, in Kenya, geospatial mapping has helped us understand where most of these disadvantaged and vulnerable populations live. And once we know where these children are clustered and concentrated, it really makes us it makes us easier to support countries to program. Next slide. We are also recognizing increasingly the fact that when we are talking about subnational focus, we also need to embrace the principle of differentiated strategies. And here is a very interesting example of Myanmar, where we see extreme diversity in context. There are geographies in Myanmar, which have conflict. We have certain areas which have ethnic minorities. We also have urban slums, which are getting an increasing population of zero-dose children. So really understanding that every country can have these very diverse contexts. The urban population is increasing, the number of urban poor is increasing, and they are becoming hotbeds of disease because vaccination and other services are not reaching those slums. But at the same time, there are remote rural areas which are highly inaccessible, and therefore services are a problem. We also have several areas in several countries which are inhabited by ethnic minorities, which are generally off the problematic radar. And we see active conflict and war zones, and also border areas where a lot of children are getting missed. So really encouraging countries to adopt highly differentiated approaches has been one of our biggest areas of focus during these recent years. And this is something that we want to build on as we strengthen our work around zero-dose children. Next slide, please. Partnerships, we think, is an extremely important area. With WHO and UNICEF, we are increasingly trying to encourage the right kind of partnerships. So we put in place a new partners engagement framework about 5 years ago, where we became extremely country-centric, and try to push a lot of our technical support and our investments on technical support from global and regional level to country level, and as I said, not just the national level, but subnational levels as well. And as we started to invest more and more in these partnerships, we realized that there are new partners that we have to embrace and leverage. For example, in some of the conflict settings, we have seen the growing importance of embracing humanitarian actors, and some of the large civil society organizations like IFRC, IRC. And this is a new kind of partnership model that we have embraced, but increasingly we think that this is something that can help us intervene much more effectively in those settings which are fragile and which are conflict-ridden. Another set of partners is sort of, very new kind of organizations that bring huge expertise in program management and accountability. So CASIS is one of those partners that we have successfully engaged with in Pakistan, Afghanistan, DRC, and several other countries, where they have done commendable work in supporting countries in strengthening their programmatic leadership, management, and coordination, putting together dashboards which make it so much easier for countries to monitor their programmatic performance, but with special focus on inequities. UNICEF is also now trying to expand the ambit of its engagement to make sure that immunization is actually co-delivered and co-administered with a whole range of other services such as nutrition. But increasingly, our endeavor is to make sure that there is a bouquet of services, in which immunization is situated, so that we advocate for integrated primary healthcare delivery with very sharp focus on vulnerable and marginalized populations. Next slide, please. One of the very interesting aspects of our engagement has been constant dialogue with the highest echelons of political leadership in what we call pivotal countries. So here you can see that there are 6 countries that Gavi supports that actually are home to 65% of zero-dose children. So about 5 years ago, we brought this new concept of segmentation of countries, where we tiered countries. So our first tier consists of 10 countries which are large and which actually are home to more than 75% of underimmunized, unimmunized kids. And then we have a tier 2 set of countries, another 10, which are extremely fragile and where immunization related challenges are very deep because of political instability or conflict. And that group has countries like Somalia, Chad, CAR, Haiti, Yemen, Syria. And we have tried to actually elevate the level of our dialogue in these countries to the highest level. The heads of states, the prime ministers, the finance ministers, and the health ministers, making sure we invest in building political will and making sure that immunization is embraced as a top priority. And I must say that this is a strategy which has actually given us very good dividends, because in all these tier 1 countries, we see a very, very positive trajectory in terms of immunization outcomes. Next slide. Gender barriers is something that we are increasingly focusing on, because we think there is an inextricable link between inequity and gender-related barriers. We are lucky that in aggregate terms, at the global level, boys and girls have equal access to immunization. But I think it is really gender-related barriers that caregivers face that we are focusing on. And there's some very interesting experiments that we have done in a variety of countries where, for example, even adapting immunization hours you know, and delivering immunization services in late evening, over the weekends, or just changing the location of immunization session with much greater responsiveness to the needs of caregivers, who are mostly women or mothers in Gavi supported countries, has shown some very, very good results. So really gender is at the heart of our equity related initiatives. Next slide. So this is another example where I just wanted to highlight the fact that we are trying to make sure that we work on fundamentals, but we also bring in an element of innovation. And we try and take a systems approach, you know, where we engage with the political leadership, we strengthen programmatic leadership and management, we work on supply chain data, we collaborate with several other partners in the space, we bring on board civil society organizations, and we also bring innovators. And this has actually shown us some very good results in DRC, where increasingly we have succeeded in, or the country actually with our support have succeeded in reaching more and more children. Next. So this is the kind of, you know, so this is how now we have real-time data where we try and track how many children who were not earlier reached are being reached as a result of the package of interventions that we are supporting countries with. Next, please. So this is really my last slide because I was asked to speak about COVID-19 vaccine. Anne has already touched on it, and the ACT accelerator and the vaccine pillar within that. So with WHO, CEPI, Gavi are co-leading this initiative. And the whole idea is that we should try and ensure equitable access to appropriate, safe, efficacious COVID-19 vaccines. So what we're trying to do is to create a COVAX facility, which is in a way a global pooled procurement mechanism, so that we can give demand or volume guarantees to vaccine manufacturers. So they have predictable demand, they have predictable financing behind that. And then in turn, we bring demand from all countries, rich and poor, to make sure that the doses that we are able to secure within the next year and a half, you know, are more equitably distributed, so that at least high-risk populations are covered in all countries, because we know that, you know, we can't have price bidding wars or some countries that have deep pockets walk away with bulk of the vaccine doses. That, of course, would be quite scarce, at least for a year from now. Thank you.